Well, good afternoon and welcome back to the shop. So if you remember in the last video, we did the trunk lid, we did all the gaps around the trunk, we found there was a high spot. So if you watch this video here for a few seconds, you'll see I put a bunch of mud on that corner to raise that corner out a bit, and we'll flatten that out, and then what we'll be able to do is make that flush with the trunk and then blend it in. The other thing we did, and we had found out in the last video, was the reservoir for the antifreeze on this car was interfering with the hood closing. And that was not only making a mess on the bottom of the hood, but the hood wasn't closing properly, and that's no good. So we took the reservoir out, and here's a here's a video of me taking the reservoir out. But basically we'll figure that out later. But right now, what we wanted to do is get the gaps. Remember, we wanted to work on the gaps of this hood. And the easy way to do any gapping is to go out and get a compass, set the distance you want between the compass and the pencil. And what I ended up doing is I put a spacer in there so that it wouldn't move. Remember, these things are a little flimsy so they can move. So I taped it so that it's locked into that gap. And then what I did is I used the actual body line, to run the metal pin along the body. And of course that transfers a pencil mark to the tape. And that pencil mark I took and I ran everywhere it needed to be done. Now there's places where, of course, I know the gap is fine. I don't need to do any work there. But then you say to yourself, well, Wally, the reason you didn't want to do the gapping on this car is because the hood shifted left and right. Well, it doesn't do that anymore. I mean, it moves a little bit, but it doesn't move like it did before, where I could move this hood back and forth. We needed to find a way to lock this hood that when it was closed, it would stay in the same spot. And that's for two reasons. The gap is one, but the other is the stripe. Once the stripe is on this car and you close this hood, you don't want the hood a quarter inch to the left or a quarter inch to the right, because then what would happen is your stripe won't align. Also, too, you run a risk of banging the paint. You're going to make a mark on the paint because the hood hits the body. So how do you take care of that? Well, what we ended up doing is we ended up creating these two metal brackets, and we have these custom bump stops. And these custom bump stops have a flat area around them. That flat area supports the hood, so it sits up on the hood and supports it. But the tip actually goes into the hood. So there's a hole drilled in the hood, and they have the bumper here that goes inside that. So when you close this hood now, those two pins center in those holes on those bump stops. So not only does that bump stop give me the ability now to set the height here, because I can unscrew or screw that bump stop up or down, it stops the hood from moving left and right. And that is what we critically needed to do in order to get this so we can do the gapping. So as I said, welcome to the video. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes showing you how I built those brackets and how we put them in the car. But basically, now that we're done and we have our line drawn, all I need to do now is take my sanding disc and cut back to the line I just drew, and that'll give me a perfect gap all the way around this hood. Okay, so we have a flat surface on the hood that gives us an area that we can create some sort of a centering pin. And I was thinking to myself, okay, so how can we do that? How can we make it so that when the hood comes down, it doesn't move left or right? Also, I want to be able to adjust the height of the hood up and down in order to get the corners flush. So I went online and I bought a pair of these. These are standard hood stop bumps, right? You can get these, they screw in, you adjust the height, and then that hits the hood and you can adjust the height of it. But it won't do anything for centering. Well, what I did is I simply machined it. What we've created now is a little top hat. We have a flat surface here, and that flat surface is going to actually, when it goes up against the hood will rest on that. The hole that I'm going to drill into the body is only going to accept the top hat part, this little thinner part at the top. That will then go hit the hood. Once this is in, of course, the hood's not going to be able to go left or right. I'll be able to do the striping because we can't paint stripes if the hood moves left or right. We have to lock this hood in, get the stripes on it, and then we can take it apart. Okay, the first thing I did is I measured from the hole out a certain distance. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything specific other than I wanted to get it away from the radius because I need that plate to come out here. What I had to do next is, now that I know where I'm going to mount it, I needed to open up the hood and then figure out
how far down I wanted that rubber knob. So what I did is I just picked an arbitrary distance, again, just somewhere around there, and that ends up being 2 inches from the edge here. So from that edge right there, 2 inches. So then that means from the firewall, because that's 1 inch from that edge to the firewall, the piece needs to be 3 inches to get to where I want. But of course that means I have to go 3.5 inches because I need to have some meat at the end. So 3.5 inches to the bend. So in this aluminum plate here, or this aluminum stick, then what we're going to do is make one end 3.5 inches, the other bend probably about 2 inches, and then that way there we can attach it to the firewall. Okay, so what I did is I just took that piece of aluminum, I cut it not only 3.5 inches, but I added 2 inches. Now this 2 inches is going to bend, and this is what's going to be up against the firewall. I've already measured to make sure that I have the distance from where I want it mounted down. So 2 inches works. And then of course 3.5 inches is what we needed to extend from the firewall in order to give me the perch that we then drill this, and then this obviously will then be out on the edge like that. Okay, so here's the bracket installed. We have it mounted on the firewall. It's very solid. You can see it doesn't move very much. I mean, it's aluminum, it's going to move. The nut I have, or the spacer, I have the nuts on both sides so I can pin it and lock it. And that way there I can adjust the height now. So I can use this to adjust the height, move the screws. And as I said before, we created a socket for it on the other side. That is just the size of the upper crown, not the lower base. So the lower base is going to actually add support. So let's close the hood. Okay, so we'll close it. And that sits right down now inside that tab. My lines are aligned, so I've kept the alignment proper on the hood. Now the other thing is, look, I'm trying to swing it side to side now. And I can move it, obviously, but that's only one is in. We're going to be putting the other one on the other side. So with both of these in place, this hood should have very little swing back and forth. Okay, so what we've done is we've installed the second bump stop. You can see it here. I haven't screwed it in. I just needed it to mark and be able to put the hole in, but I can adjust this up and down, and I can then level the hood. But the main thing we put these in for is that now that I dropped the hood, first off, you didn't hear it slam because they are absorbing that. That's number one. Number two is they're stopping the hood from moving back and forth this way. So what we've done by now making this hood not able to move, we can address the gaps. The other reason for the centering pins is that when we draw the stripes on this car, we want to make sure the hood is going to be where it's going to be when it's going to be, right? You can't just take the hood off and put it back on and then realize that the stripes don't align. So we can mark all the stripes out with the rubber stoppers in, and that stops this hood from moving. So every time the hood closes, it absolutely will keep the stripes consistent. Well, that's it. As I mentioned before, no more body work. I mean, we're going to have to do some flattening, and of course there's going to be a little bit of work there, but I meant as far as overall gaps and doors and finishes and everything like that, that's all done. So basically now I'm going to blow this car apart. I'm going to clean up the underside of this hood. I'm going to clean up some of the edges here, and then once I do that, I'm going to take off all the doors, take off the trunk, put them all on their stands, because the next job after this is absolutely putting down a couple of coats of primer, probably about 2 or 3 coats. So I'm going to need to do the underneath of the hood, I have to do the underneath of everything first and all the jams, and then I'll come back, do the body, and then do the tops of everything, and then get all of that done. Then I can reassemble as you see it like this, and that's when we start with the guide coat and the block, and we try to block this car as flat as we can. We know that's going to be a challenge. But once that's done, we can think about paint. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, and I'll see you next time with my painter's mask on.